Many of the greatest horror films are either inspired by or entirely based upon real-life horror stories. From the supernatural to serial killers, every subgenre of horror has been influenced by real-world stories. Number 5. The 1999 film Ravenous is a horror thriller loosely based on the real-life story of the Donner Party. In the 19th century, traveling to the American West Coast was a dangerous and risky adventure. The Donner Party was a group of immigrants aiming to reach California. The group of 90, led by the Donner brothers, left Illinois in April of 1846. The Donners believed they'd found a quicker route to California and led their party off the beaten path. A trail guide named Lansford Hastings was leading an early wagon train and promised to leave a trail for the Donner Party. Things were going well enough until they reached the Weber Canyon in Utah. Hastings left a note telling them the route was more dangerous than expected and to camp there until he returned. Hastings wouldn't return, and the party sent a message to find him and get further instructions. The instructions took the Donner Party on an even more perilous route, and they reached the Sierra Nevada mountains much later than planned. The delays meant the party was trapped by heavy snow. Party members suffered from hypothermia and starvation. It wasn't long before people started to succumb to the elements. Their bodies were buried in the snowbanks, and the survivors took to eating the animals that pulled the wagons, their family pets, and leather belts. When there was nothing else left, they returned to the bodies frozen in the snow. According to some sources, more than 40 people lost their lives before the rescue teams found the Donner Party. Survivors admitted they'd eaten their fellow travelers in an act of desperation. The media at the time sensationalized the incident and made out the survivors were cannibal monsters. In actuality, the survivors went on to live normal lives. It was the story of the Donner Party that inspired the antagonist in Antonia Bird's Ravenous. Ravenous tells the story of John Boyd, a second lieutenant in the Mexican-American War, and takes place in the 1840s, around the same time as the Donner Party's expedition. Boyd's unit is attacked by the Mexicans, but instead of fighting, he plays dead. His body is piled with the others, and he accidentally consumes the blood of one of his units. Due to his cowardice, Boyd is posted to a remote military outpost in the Sierra Nevada mountain range. Shortly after he arrives, the small skeleton crew rescues a man who is the survivor of a wagon train that became lost and trapped in the mountains. According to the man, they resorted to cannibalism, and their leader began taking lives as his cannibalistic urges were insatiable. Boyd and some of the rest of the skeleton crew go with the man to investigate and save any survivors. Of course, the story of the Donner Party was vastly different to the doomed party in Ravenous, which also leans on Native American legends of the Wendigo, but it doesn't make the film any less scary. Number 4. The Haunting in Connecticut is based on the supposedly true story of a supernatural horror suffered by a Connecticut family in the 1980s. The story began in 1986 when the Snedeker family moved into a large house in Southington, Connecticut. The family had moved to be closer to the hospital where their oldest son was being treated for cancer. The house was cheap and big enough for the home to be a family of 6, so the Snedekers didn't do too much research before agreeing to rent the property. This would soon prove to be a mistake. While cleaning out the basement, Carmen Snedeker, the matriarch of the family, found embalming equipment. The family discovered the house had once been a funeral parlor, and apparently the spirits of some of the people who were embalmed there still lingered. The son, who was going through radiation treatment, began to see ghosts and witness terrifying apparitions. Before long, the family also experienced paranormal activity. The ghosts were apparently extremely violent, physically attacking every member of the household. In one instance, Carmen was mopping the floor when the water turned blood red and smelled of decaying flesh, and it spread through the house. The haunting got so bad the family was forced to get help from paranormal experts. They invited experts Ed and Lorraine Warren to their home. The Warrens are now infamous in the paranormal horror world, with countless supposedly true horror films being based upon their investigations. The Warrens and a team of investigators spent several weeks in the home. They also experienced violent acts and concluded the house needed a full-scale exorcism. After the house was cleared, the family lived there for another 2 years before moving out. Residents since then have only reported minor paranormal activity. Of course, the story has plenty of skeptics, and in no small part due to the Warrens themselves. Amityville was the most famous case of the Warrens, and it's been proven to be fiction. casting doubt on their other investigations. Ray Garden, who wrote the book that The Haunting in Connecticut is based on, claimed the entire thing was made up and that Ed Warren told him the family was just crazy. Number 3. Dead Ringers is a psychological horror film that uses the deteriorating mental health of two of its main characters to keep audiences on the edge. It's loosely based on the real-life story of Stuart and Cyril Marcus, two gynecologists who died in a mysterious fashion in 1975. The film replaces the Marcus brothers with Elliot and Beverly Mantle. Elliot is outgoing and a womanizer, while his brother is more shy and reserved. Like their real-life counterparts, they both work as gynecologists specializing in women and fertility issues. Elliot takes advantage of his position to seduce women. When he becomes bored of a particular partner, he passes them off to Beverly without letting the women know they're now sleeping with another person. Everything is fine until aspiring actress Claire Neveu visits the clinic. Beverly falls in love with her and the two start a relationship, much to Elliot's displeasure. Claire is addicted to medication, and Beverly soon becomes addicted too. When Claire leaves for work, Beverly's mental health deteriorates, leading him to hallucinate and put his own patients at risk. As with all the stories on this list, what happens in the film and what happened in reality differs significantly, but the true story behind the tale is unsettling enough on its own. While the romance subplot was entirely fictional, Stuart and Cyril Marcus did share their lives with one another. They lived together, worked together, and shared teaching appointments. They also shared an addiction to barbiturates. As in the film, the doctors worked while under the influence of drugs, putting their patients' lives at risk. Their co-workers were aware, at least on some occasions, that this was happening but said nothing. The exact circumstances of their deaths remain unknown. They were found by a handyman in July of 1975, though they had lost their lives a while before they were found. The house was described as a pigsty, with trash and human waste everywhere. Police also found a large number of barbiturates. At first, it appeared as if they died from an overdose, accidental or otherwise. An autopsy showed nothing in their system, and it was suggested they died from withdrawal, although there also appeared to be other injuries that could have caused this death. Number 2. On January 25, 1998, Tom and Eileen Lonergan disappeared off the Great Barrier Reef after an improper head count resulted in the dive boat that had taken them out, leaving them behind. 6 years later, a film based upon their appearance became a surprise hit at the Sundance Festival, renewing criticism of the company that had left the couple behind. Tom and Eileen were relatively experienced divers, having picked up the hobby as they traveled around the world. On January 25th, they decided to take a trip out to the Outer Edge Diving Company to see the Great Barrier Reef. The trip would consist of 3 dives on the Ribbon Reefs, giving tourists a chance to see the incredible natural wonder. The boat could host 26 passengers, but it's not known if it was running at full capacity that day. The first 2 dives went off without a problem. The third, beginning at 3 p.m. and 40 miles offshore, would not. They were last seen 12 meters down. Neither seemed to be having any trouble, and there were no signs of anything wrong. After less than an hour in the water, the rest of the passengers resurfaced. During a head count, it's alleged that 2 of the passengers briefly jumped back into the water, leading the crew to believe there were 2 more people on board. Shockingly, this isn't entirely unusual, as a series of safety inspections at 59 dive stops in 2002 led to 76 notices of improper head counts, dive logs, or lookouts. Nobody noticed the 2 sets of missing diving equipment, and it would be 3 days before the crew noticed the belongings of Tom and Eileen that were left on the ship. Unfortunately, by that point, it was too late, but the couple could have been saved the day before. The Outer Edge took another group of tourists diving in the same area the following day. One of the divers reported 6 dive weights that had been abandoned on the reef floor. The crew member he told described them as a bonus. Over the following months, more signs of the couple emerged, but none gave actual rescue teams any hope. Inflatable jackets marked with the couple's names, their tanks, and one of Eileen's fins were recovered. The rest of Eileen's wetsuit washed up the following month. Several months after the disappearance, a dive slate with words etched on it was found by fishermen. The message read, Monday, January 26, 1998. To anyone who can help us, we've been abandoned on Agincourt Reef by MV Outer Edge. The couple's bodies have never been recovered, leading some to believe they faked their deaths, though this is incredibly unlikely. Also unlikely is the fate the couple faces in open water. A shark attack, as there were no signs of any attack from any of the equipment recovered. But until bodies are recovered, it's impossible to know for sure. Number 1. The 2007 film Borderlands tells the horrifying story of a satanic drug-smuggling cult and human sacrifices, and is loosely based on an equally disturbing true story. The film starts off as a relatively typical film. 3 American college students go to Mexico for a weekend getaway. After a night of partying with locals, one of the students disappears and his friends are brought into a nightmare situation as they try to rescue him. Some critics complain that the film was more than gore and horror, but it ties to the real-world events and only makes it more terrifying. Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo was a drug dealer, serial killer, and cult leader. Constanzo was actually born in Miami, though his mother was a Cuban immigrant who practiced Santeria religion. Constanzo became interested in the religion, a blend of West African beliefs and Christianity, and similar belief systems, and at a young age became a priest at just the age of 10. As a teenager, Constanzo committed petty crimes like theft and vandalism and set himself up as a fortune teller. It was this that put Constanzo in touch with the rich and powerful when he moved to Mexico City. Fortune telling expanded to spiritual cleansings and other magic spells, and celebrities and politicians would come to him for his services. According to some sources, he pledged himself to a deity that's equivalent to the devil, and many of his clients requested his services for nefarious acts. Among these were members of drug cartels who wanted mystical protection from smuggling and turf wars. The Hernandez gang, who boasted a network from Mexico to Michigan, increasingly became under his sway. Constanzo's good looks and apparent magical powers attracted followers, and he built a cult around himself. One of his most prominent followers was a former American college student, Sarah Aldrete. Aldrete had connections to the Hernandez gang and brought them further into the fold. Before long, the Hernandez gang made Constanzo their high priest. He was working from the property they owned, and he was calling the shots. The gang's rivals and corrupt police officers were taken to be sacrificed for greater protection from the gods. It's believed these acts would make the gang members invincible or even bulletproof. It was in March of 1989 that the events Borderlands were loosely based on would occur. Mark James Kilroy was a University of Texas student who traveled to Mexico with 3 friends for spring break. Mark was kidnapped by the gang while out drinking and was sacrificed. This ultimately would be the undoing of the gang, as Mark's uncle was an agent of the US Customs Service. Unlike the gang's other victims, Mark's disappearance was noticed, and his family wouldn't stop until the case was solved. In just a few weeks, police connected the disappearance to the Hernandez gang, and the magnitude of their crimes became known. Constanzo took his own life before he could be captured, while many of his followers were arrested and handed long prison sentences. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.